Welcome in, folks, to another great episode of I've Got a Theory. I'm your host, Henish. I'm fortunate to be joined again by Dan Fulkerson. Dan, thanks for joining me on the show again.
Of course, it's good to be back.
You got this cool thing on the wall behind you. Is that living?
Is that thing live? It is a moss bulldog. It is the biggest moss bulldog in the world, by the way. Guinness Book of World Records. I'm going to apply for it. That's what the person who made it for us told us. But yeah, it's a moss bulldog. It's living, but it's actually. What's that?
You got to give it a spritz once in a while?
No, you don't. So the moss is what she says is like maintained. So it was living, but now you do not have to water it anymore. So it is not something that's high maintenance, but it is actual real moss, and it's pretty cool. We have them all over the office.
That's awesome, man. Cool thing. Well, so let's get to the juicy stuff. What are we talking about today, Dan? What's your theory?
Well, I know that we've been in this crazy changing world for the last 16 months of COVID. And I think that a lot of people have a lot of different thoughts on it. And I think that that's good. And I think that there should be candid conversation and communication on all different sides. And so I figured, let's have a conversation about COVID. Let's have a conversation about the world, where we're at, what's going on.
What is going on? Let me ask you this, because a long time ago, it was, hey, COVID is scary because people are dying. And now the message just seems to be, you can't get COVID. COVID's bad. And I'm like, is it really that much worse than a cold or a flu if it doesn't kill you?
Yeah. And I think that, thank God we have 16 months now of data and of science. We've been throwing that word science around for the last 16 months. I think we have data points to show what we need to be concerned about. And, I'll tell you where I come from. I've been suspicious. My intuition has been on high alert from the beginning, and for a lot of different reasons. But I do think that it's a real virus. I do think that it's something that is concerning. I do think that it's something that is serious and that we need to take seriously. But I also think that we need to be careful about how fear leads us and how fear can program us and how fear can be used to create agendas that might be purposed for something other than protection from this virus. And I think that that's where my concern and my skepticism comes from. But by all means, I do think it's a real virus. I know people that have lost their lives. I know people that have been seriously ill from it. So it's not something that I take lightly. But I also look at the data. The data is still 16 months playing itself out, that it is less than a 99.98% survival rate. And the average rate or the average age of death is 78 years old. So I do think that those are all things that we have to, put into context and be aware of.
So when they say you got to get the vaccine, you have to wear the mask to protect other people. It's kind of along the same lines. But if you're over 78 or have pre-existing health conditions, the truth is maybe you should be personally a little bit more cautious. One, and make sure you get the vaccine and or masks or quarantine or social distance. But two, maybe it's a wake-up call to say, what can I do at this exact moment to improve my health so I have less pre-existing conditions or underlying factors, so I'm a little bit more healthy and robust, that if and when I get sick with anything, let alone COVID, I have a better chance of surviving if I'm that scared of dying.
And I think that's the part that bothers me considerably in this situation, is that, I work with a lot of doctors, my sisters and, the medical community, my mom's medical community, and I'm a personal injury attorney. So a lot of my friends are neurosurgeons, orthosurgeons, trauma doctors at the ER. And I've heard multiple of them use the same reference and the same joke that a lot of Americans are a banana peel away from a grave. They're one slip away because we don't treat our health the right way. Obesity is rampant, heart disease is rampant, diabetes is rampant. And the fact of the matter is you can say this is a health crisis, and it is. But we're not focusing on all of the components that make the crisis a crisis. We're not talking about, fast food consumption. We're not talking about the fact that sugary drinks in America are pushed so much more than in other countries. We're not talking about the fact that we're literally rewarding people with Krispy Kreme donuts and hamburgers for getting vaccinated. That's mind-blowing. If you care about people's health, you're going to care about all components of health. You're going to look at all of it. And that's why I try to base myself in perspective, right? I try to ground myself in perspective, because that will eliminate the fear that is not real, that's more propaganda and agendized. And what I mean by that is, look at world hunger. There's been 5.4 million people that have died in 2021 of hunger in this world. That's more than in COVID altogether, right? And we could have spent less money eliminating all world hunger than we've spent on COVID.
Yeah.
Just think, let that sink in. Every 38 seconds, someone dies of heart disease. Every 38 seconds, someone dies of heart disease. You don't see us making radical changes to improve that. Medical malpractice is the third leading cause of death in this country. Medical malpractice, going into the hospital and them screwing something up and killing you, is the third leading cause of death. You don't see people talking about that. You don't see institutional change pushed in that direction. That's the problem that I have with this, is we talk about the well-being of citizens, but then you talk about the organizations that are saying these things. Big Pharma is not in the business of helping people. Big Pharma is not in the business of doing the best thing for the population. Big Pharma is in the business of making money. And so when you start...
Yeah, that's the basis of any business, is make money or die.
100%. And usually by any means necessary when you get to that big of $1 billion conglomerate level. And unfortunately, it doesn't take a big dig and a big dive into history to see that a lot of these companies should not be trusted. Pfizer got hit with a $2.5 billion fine in a criminal investigation in criminal charges for fraud in 2011.
I'm sure they settled and accepted no responsibility. Is that what happened?
It was a criminal case. It wasn't even a civil case. It was the government. It was the feds hitting them with a $2.5 billion fine for fraud. You know how much fraud you have to do? You know the type of fraud you have to do to get hit with a $2.5 billion fine? And this is the company that 10 years later, we're going to say, hey, listen to them. They have our best interests in mind. That's where I have issues, is I have issues.
They've been profiteering during this too, right? I mean, everyone's like, oh, the vaccine's free. I was like, no, it's not. I paid with it before my taxes. The government paid for this thing. No one just donated these vaccines. We're paying a crap load for them.
People would be way less suspicious if there was a couple things going on. One, we eliminated censorship. Allow for open discussion. Even if people are coming out putting some crazy conspiracies, some weird, wild shit into the world, let them be heard. Let people use their own judgment, their own brains, their own scientific methods, their own data analysis to decide what makes sense and what is right and wrong for them. When you start killing conversation, people get suspicious. That's one. Two, don't allow these big pharma companies to make billions and billions and billions and billions of dollars off a world pandemic. That is suspicious. When you have the heads of these companies that have now doubled and tripled their wealth in 1 year, individual men doubling and tripling to $4, $6, $8 billion net worths, that starts to make people scratch their heads. That starts to make people go, hey, if this is really about health, why is there so much profit involved? That doesn't make sense.
It's true. And so, there is this thing. And so, I've heard it in the media because I do flip on the news once in a while. I'm like, how are they presenting this? And they always just now present it as COVID cases. And there's an uptick in cases because factually, I'm on the covid19.ca.gov state dashboard, and it shows the death rate and it shows the case rate up through from last year, March, through this year into the end of July. And in January of this year, we had the highest death rate, 1.7 per 100,000, right?
Yep.
And last summer, in July of last summer, we're at 0.4 per 100,000. So 1.7 is quite a bit higher than the 0.4. Now we're down to a 0.01. Yep. 0.01, which is basically non-pandemic. So at this point, we're like, yeah, there's a Delta variant, but it doesn't seem to be killing as many people. And I would think with the vaccination rate, which factually, it does seem like the vaccine does reduce the severity of side effects on people, including potentially death, especially in people that are at risk. And so maybe it's helpful, but the fact is that do we need to keep shutting down economies, wearing masks, changing our behavior? Because if it's not COVID-19, if it's not COVID Delta variant, if it's not the next thing that comes out in 6 months or a year from now, there's always been diseases and there's always been varying degrees of effectiveness of those diseases of killing people. But wouldn't natural immunity be something that you inject that's some kind of foreign substance every day?
And that's something you're not even allowed to talk about anymore. And that's crazy that you're not even allowed to say the words natural immunity. Whereas I had COVID, right? I went through COVID. I got antibodies. gone through that process. And my doctor told me, someone that I trust, someone that I've gone to for years, that I have faith in, told me, now that you've had it, you have natural immunity. We don't know how long that natural immunity lasts, but we know with pretty good certainty that if you ever catch COVID again, your body's going to know how to fight it. Your body's going to be better able to deal with it and react to it. So you're pretty good and safe now, right?
Yeah.
That something that there is no data, there is no science, there is no study right now that shows that my natural immunity after having COVID is any different than me getting a vaccine.
It'd be worth exploring that, wouldn't it? Wouldn't it be interesting to figure that out?
It should be. Yeah. It should be.
They should try to figure out every angle of this and say, all right, let's look at all the different options. And then they don't, like I'm looking on this and it'll mention as like a caveat. There's like a little asterisk, like, oh, you know, it is noted that pre-existing conditions and diabetes and obesity are factors. That should be a big bold print. And I remember seeing something on the news last week. It's like children are starting to be affected by COVID-19. You know, they're getting affected really poorly. And then it showed the kid in the hospital. Granted, it was a kid. He was a 16-year-old kid, but he was also legitimately probably 400 pounds spilling over the bed. So they're like, why didn't they, they show the video. Why didn't they talk about, hey, this guy probably has a few pre-existing conditions. Namely, he eats way too much, and so now his body has all these other issues that it could have been anything that would have killed him, not just necessarily this, but especially something that's going to affect your respiratory issues when you have obesity and you don't have space for lungs, let alone sending oxygen throughout your body because of your bad health habits.
But I can answer the question of why they're not. It doesn't play itself to the program. It doesn't play itself to fear. It's the same reason why they haven't come out on any news station and talked about why PCR tests are now, they've gone back through them and the FDA has gone, hey, the way that you were doing
positives.
PCR tests, yeah, it was bringing back a ton of false positives. So you got to also look at the numbers from last year and realize what they were doing is they basically said that they will allow anything up until 35 threshold, meaning that when you replicate the virus more than 35 times to try to find it in a test, after you hit that 35 threshold time, there's too many false positives. It's unlikely that you're finding the actual virus and that you're not running and conducting the test the right way. We were running those tests for a year at 45 threshold. So we were running all of these tests and creating false positives because we weren't running them correctly. That's all come out now with the FDA. They've recalled them, pulled them back. That's all there. So we have to be aware of that as well, is that the numbers were not overly accurate even last year. So those are all things that we have to be aware of. What I'm more concerned about right now is the direction, right? Like you said, the numbers and the data do not reflect where we're going in society. They just came out right now and they said in order to go to a gym or to a restaurant in New York State, you will have to show proof of vaccination. Think about what that does. That's not showing proof of a vaccination to go to Walmart or to big businesses that have been crushing it for the last 16 months. That again cripples small mom and pop businesses. That's what that does, because you have a large population that is still not vaccinated. That you're basically saying, if you don't get vaccinated, you're not allowed to be a part of America. Now, I want to talk about something really quick that I don't think people are aware of. People fall back and argue with me and say, well, yeah, but mandatory vaccinations are legal in the United States of America. They don't know where that comes from. They have no idea the case law or the precedent that was set in order to make sterilizations, which is what the case was based on, sterilizing people, legal. In the 1920s, there was a case.
And let's explain what sterilization is, because I think some people don't know. I bet you a lot of people.
It was forced sterilization where they came and they said, hey, you're not the right type of person to have kids. We're going to make it so you aren't able to have kids. And we will strap you down to a table and perform a procedure on you so you are not able to have kids ever again. That's sterilization.
Like back in the eugenics time when people were like, some people are fit to have children and some people aren't. We're going to take out your reproductive parts.
Buck versus Bell was the birth of eugenics because it allowed sterilization in criminal inmates, right? So think about that. We're not saying like mass population sterilization, only in criminal inmates. And they were literally sterilizing feeble-minded individuals. Do you know what that means? 100 years later.
That's a gray area.
Stupid people. They were sterilizing stupid people. They were saying, you're too stupid to reproduce. We're going to sterilize you. They sterilized over 60,000 people until it was put to end. And what we realized, we look back, is who was the one, who were we sterilizing? You and I both know the answer to that. We weren't
Yep.
sterilizing white men. We were
Minorities.
sterilizing minority communities, right?
Yep.
So this case law that people back up and use to propose mandatory vaccinations across this country was used in a racial way to sterilize minority communities. And you're going to stand up 100 years later and say, hey, it's a good idea to mandate vaccines based on this precedent. I don't understand.
Who do you think is putting on the pressure, right? Because we hear it coming from the government, from OSHA, from county health advisors, and all these different people. Who's persuading and pushing them this agenda? Is there, I get that we've got epidemiologists and stuff like that, but they've got to be changing their tone when I'm looking at these numbers, right? COVID hospitalizations. Yeah, in January, the number of patients were 22,000. Now we're down to 3,000 people. And they're like, the hospitals aren't full. The original message was, we have to get this under control because the hospitals are too full and they're making life and death decisions. That's not the case anymore. So the messaging always changes.
We're in such a bad, devastating point of this pandemic that we're literally going to fire a third of our hospital workers and nurses because they haven't been vaccinated. So we have the ability to cut off a third of the staffs at hospitals, and we're in such a devastating part of this pandemic. It doesn't add up. And when you ask that question, that's the question that I've been asking is where does this source from, right? And the scarier part to me is you look across the world. This isn't just going on in the United States of America. This is going on worldwide. You're seeing worldwide lockdowns. You're seeing Australia bring out the police and military for 9 COVID cases. You're seeing protests in Italy's parliament, in France, in the UK. You're seeing worldwide the same collective push of control. And that's what I think it is. I think this virus is being used as a catalyst to be able to control people and control the masses more than they already do. I think it's a thumb that's able to be put down over the people of this world. That's what I think. Now, does that sound crazy? Yes. But the last 16 months has been, pardon my language, fucking crazy. So that's the only thing that makes sense to me. And I look at publications and I look at entities like the World Economic Forum. I think that's an entity that everyone should follow and everyone should look, because it is the top 100 corporations of this world. It is the top world leaders of this world. They meet every single year. You won't hear that on CNN. You won't hear that on Fox News, but they meet every single year and they discuss the things that are going on in the world. They held a COVID simulation in October of 2019. They held a COVID simulation in 2009. You don't hear that? Event 201. Everyone go look up Event 201. Ask me why they don't talk about that on CNN. Ask me why they don't talk about that on Fox News. It's some weird shit. That's all I'm saying. I'm not conspiracy theory. I'm just saying there's questions that need to be asked. There's dots that need to be connected. How do you have Fauci on the news 10 times a day for the first 8 months, and he's not talking about how he knew what they were doing in the Wuhan lab? He's not talking about the fact that he knew that money from the United States of America was going to fund this research. That's suspicious shit. Wouldn't you think?
That was all out in his testimony, in congressional testimony, right? They asked him that, and it was actually like a guy that he knew that was over there teaching them how to do this, how to do these, how to make these the diseases. And now that it seems that it's very likely that it was man-made, if not man-influenced, to make this version, right? Because there's thousands, if not tens of thousands of versions of any disease, and they evolve and they get modified and they change, and a lot of them peter out, and that's why we've got this Delta variant that's more contagious, but factually doesn't kill as many people, right? Another interesting thing is we've got the Olympics going on. You know what the vaccination rate in Japan is? It's less than 30%. It's less than 30%. But you're also looking at a country where, one, they don't really smoke a lot. They're fairly healthy. They've got a good diet. They've got their obesity problems in check. And when you relate that to countries like Italy, which was hit hard, which has a smoking issue, a lot of Italians smoke and they've got compromised lungs. In India, where my family's ethnically from, we've got issues there because literally 99% of people are affected by severe pollution and respiratory issues from pollution. So it's not surprising that these countries would say, well, these countries have been rocked and devastated by this disease. Well, we know this disease does affect people that have respiratory issues. And you've got underlying respiratory issues, because you smoke, because you live in a polluted area, because you've got bad health, because of your own personal choices, well, that's going to be a factor. But if you're a regular healthy person, like most 80% of people, right? I'm sure Pareto principle applies worldwide. You're probably going to be fine. And the stats prove that, right? You mentioned 99.98% chance that you're going to survive. And I remember going through my 23andMe. So they've got my genetics already. They've got my DNA. And I did the test and they plug in my health information. And like, oh, based on these stats, you have a 99.997% chance of being totally fine from COVID. I'm like, oh, I'll take those odds because that's safer than me walking across the street and getting, and likely getting smushed versus just getting COVID and, feeling a little sick for a few days. And I get it. People have died from it, but every time I hear about it, it's always like someone that wasn't healthy from the get-go, And so, and surprising also in the stats is the flu cases. Every year, on average, 60,000 people in the US die from the flu. And I checked up you can look this up too, as long as you're looking up stuff that you can look up on the CDC website, the number of cases of deaths from flu in the last flu season, the 2021, was 636. Yep. So it decreased by 99%.
And my favorite is, well, yeah, it's because we were wearing masks.
Yeah, right.
I'm like, okay, so if we could eliminate the flu and eliminate all the people that died from the flu, you don't think we would have been talking about wearing masks before now? Like that's the stupidest thing that I've ever heard. And not to mention, even Fauci himself talks about how small these viral particles are. I'm not saying don't wear masks. N95 masks work. They're built to work. But these cloth masks that you're making out of your shirt that you can see through, I can still see you. You really think that that's doing anything? Like that's like me through a chain link fence and thinking that the chain link fence is going to prevent my pee from going through to the other side. It doesn't do anything, people. So, it's one of those that common sense is not that common anymore. And we have to start to get back. And this is the only reason I keep talking about it, right? Is I want people to start asking their own questions, start doing their own research. Don't just eat what you're fed, right? Like, don't just take it and go, that's a fact. I heard it on the news. That must be true. Don't just take it and go, well, a big pharmaceutical company told me this, it must be true. Or the government told me this, it must be true. Do your own research. If you think that you were given this brain for some reason, use it. Like actually dig into stuff. Because if not, unfortunately, you will be a pawn on the board. That's just the reality of life.
And as you mentioned, the pharmaceuticals have repeatedly proven to be untrustworthy. In fact, there's laws written into US law where you can't sue a pharmaceutical company for a drug that's been FDA approved, right? And so there's laws that prevent them from any recourse from that. And then how these drugs evolve, if it's a variation of a prior drug and they can show the evolutionary chain, they don't have to go through FDA approval. And that's how you get drugs like these heavy duty opiates that have killed hundreds of thousands of people, that the Sackler family and Purdue Pharmaceuticals have been caught and busted for killing hundreds of thousands of people. And that's just from opiates directly. It doesn't include all the numbers of people that couldn't get opiates anymore, switched over to heroin or something else, and then died from that, right? I mean, so that's sketchy. So I remember watching something on Conan O'Brien. He had Bill Burr on recently. He's a comedian. They were talking about getting the vaccine, and they're like, I don't think the agenda is to kill the people that are compliant. And I agree, it's not to kill people that are compliant, but there's other angles, right? And I think that it's like a brainstorming session at my company. When we do brainstorming, I'm like, let's put together all the good ideas and let's throw in some bad ideas too, just so we can suss out why it might be a bad idea. But what if they're giving us this vaccine so that 10 years from now, when we're watching the modern day version of Jerry Springer show midday, we're sitting around at home, like, hey, did you take a COVID vaccine back in 2021? If you are, you may be entitled to recourse because we found out that XYZ, and now you've got to take additional drugs to counteract the long-term impacts of the vaccine. I'm not saying that's possible. I'm just saying it's not impossible, right? And so there's all these variations, and I agree with you. I think that the few pharmaceutical companies that have a stranglehold on the world's economy, Bayer Pharmaceuticals, Pfizer, Purdue, these companies that are in dozens of different countries and all pay hundreds of millions of dollars to all of the key politicians so that they make laws and policy that benefit their corporation. of course they're going to have some, they're going to be the thumb on this and say, hey, we've made this worldwide and that's how we're making this happen. It's not too different from the defense industry and never ending wars on terrorism and buying guns and ships and rockets. It's a huge multi-trillion-dollar industry, because if the US alone spends $650 billion on defense, think about all the other countries that are also spending it on jets and planes. And the same thing goes for pharmaceuticals. And these such huge industries. I don't know how it ever fixed. I don't know how it gets fixed. How does this get fixed in 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, 20 years? Like, how do we get out of this, Dan?
I want to read you a quote, and I think it's a really poignant quote. It's from Herbert Lay, who is the former commissioner of the US FDA. Okay, so he's the former commissioner of the US FDA.
What year was this?
This is 1970. Okay. This is, quote, the FDA protects big drug companies and is subsequently rewarded in using the government police powers. They attack those who threaten big drug companies. People think that's FDA protecting them. It isn't. What the FDA is doing and what the public thinks it is doing are as different and as night and day. That's the former commissioner of the US FDA, right?
Wow.
So, it's one of those that I think that unfortunately we live in a facade world, and it takes some digging to realize how it really works. And I don't know what the answer is, man. Like, I wish I did. I think that unfortunately the lobbyists are a big part of the problem. That's why you have these DOD contracts the way that you do. That's why you have big pharma. That's why you have, tobacco industries doing what they do. Lobbyists in this nation are an issue. In some way, we need to figure out a way around that and a way to correct that, because you have these people that are paying millions and millions of dollars to politicians to play ball. And that's not the way that you're supposed to work. You're supposed to elect people that do the best thing for their constituents, not elect people that do the best thing for their wallet. And that's a problem. And I've had a problem with that in politics for a long time. And it's both sides of the aisle. There is no separation when it comes to that. It's Democrats and it's Republicans. And I think that's the other part that has to change, is we as a people have to start fighting amongst each other and come together and realize that, hey, both parties are in the wrong here. Both parties need to be fixed. This political system that we have is not working. And it's not working because of Republicans, and it's not working because of Democrats. It's not working because of the setup. It's not working because money runs it. And until we figure that out, I don't know how it changes.
I feel like they do this as a drama. Right? People love watching politics and getting fired up and angry about it. But I feel like that's part of the facade. Hey, get distracted because we're fighting each other. But the reality is, behind closed doors, we're pushing the same goal, right? Which is we're going to allow guns to keep going on. We're going to allow tobacco to be advertised to children. We're going to allow pharmaceutical companies to keep pushing drugs. Like, Teresa, my wife, doesn't watch too many TV shows, but because I've been putting the Olympics on, the Olympics have commercials in between them. And she's like, how come they advertise so many drugs? Like, ask your doctor if you need this drug. I don't even know what this drug does. And, she works in healthcare. She's a physical therapist, so she knows drugs roughly. She's like, why would I want to go talk to a doctor about taking a drug when I should figure out somehow to improve my lifestyle so I don't need to take that drug? And that's never the question people ask too. And the whole healthcare system's kind of rigged because doctors get scored on patient satisfaction. And Americans want instant satisfaction. The easy way to solve that is by popping a pill. It's not go run on a treadmill for 6 times a week for 30 minutes, because that's hard. And if your doctor tells you that, guess what? You're going to give them a bad patient satisfaction score. And the hospital is going to say, Dr. So-and-so that's doing health things, you can't do that. Start prescribing the pills, because it's a win-win. The pharmaceutical companies love it. And 2, the patients will give you good scores on your patient satisfaction surveys.
And you got second and third homes on the line, man. You got vacation homes on the line on this stuff. Like, this guy's getting paid good money to have his house in Aspen by pushing certain products. Like, if you don't realize that that's how it works, that's how it works. I'm sorry, folks. But guess what? These drug companies pay doctors to push certain medications. So, yeah, it's one of those that, it's going to come down to all of us waking up, doing our own research, not fighting amongst each other, and realizing that the problem is not right and left. That is not the problem. And the divide and conquer thing is real. That's how it's been working for a real long time. And no matter which side you think you're on, I really hope you reevaluate that, because we're all playing against the same field, and we're playing chess, and we're playing checkers, and they're playing chess. And the sooner that we all wake up and realize that and come together, that's what they worry about. That's what I truly think. I think the powers that be worry that we all wake up and we all come together and we go, no, enough is enough. And that's why they throwing the shit at us that they throw at us, because they don't want that to happen. That's what happened in the 1600s and the 1700s. When stuff got too bad and the government got too out of control, guess what? The people stormed the castle and the people took the government out. That's what happened, and that's what they don't want to happen. And so they keep us divided, they keep us under control, and that's where we're at. And that's the United States of America right now.
So Bill Burr said, and I need to get going, but Bill Burr said this, and I thought that this was a good point. He's like, I don't trust the internet. I don't trust the news you can get on the internet. It can be manipulated. You can end up getting doom scrolling and things like that. He didn't say all that. But he's like, I like to get my information from the library, because at least they have the decency to have two sections of information, fiction and nonfiction. But when you get your information on the internet, you don't know what's fiction and nonfiction. All of it's presented as nonfiction, as if it's true. At least the library has the decency to say, this is the nonfiction, it's published, it's true, we vetted it, there's an editor, someone read it, and these are facts.
Yep. It's a crazy clown upside down world that we're living in, man. And I'm just glad that you
can't trust anything.
Like,
yeah, it's question everything, trust everything. Don't trust everything. And I like the statement, like when you disagree with someone, like how much evidence would it take for you to consider changing your mind? Dan, Hey, thank you for joining me again on this show. I think we made a lot of interesting points. Hopefully it gets people thinking a little bit and doing some research and figuring it out, making your own decisions. And you can't let people push you around. You can't let the government push you around and share your medical records if it's not making sense. If it doesn't make sense and there's some other hidden agenda, we're going to find out eventually. We just don't know what it is today.
Thank you for having me on. I really do appreciate it.
It's another great episode of I've Got a Theory. Dan Fulkerson, your host, Henish. I'll catch you in the next show.